A 3-year-old girl kept signaling for help, but no one noticed except for a former soldier. A few minutes later he stood up, and what he did next left everyone speechless. A fly was trapped against the glass, pane buzzing faintly over and over as if knocking on a world it could never reach. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty window, revealing streaks from a half-hearted cleaning. Outside, the Kansas highway stretched like a faint pencil line across the land, quiet and still, disturbed only now and then by a passing semi, whose engine roar faded quickly behind a stand of elms turning gold with the season. Ethan Walker set his duffel bag down on the worn leather-covered bench, which had sagged with age. He sat upright as if his body hadn't yet relearned how to lean back naturally after years of rigid discipline. Even without the uniform, the straight spine and watchful eyes stayed with him, marks of a Marine who had served 18 years, twice deployed straight into combat zones. At the counter, Margaret Chen, a woman of Asian descent in her early 40s, her wavy hair pinned loosely, apron faded from years of use, was carefully wiping down the coffee machine's glass surface. No one in the diner spoke. The silence was deep enough to catch the clatter of the old HVAC unit, rattling and groaning, as it strained to keep the warmth inside the aging wooden room. Ethan wasn't hungry, but he ordered a ham sandwich and a cup of black coffee anyway. The way he said thank you was barely above a whisper, like if he said it any louder, the past might hear and come back to remind him this wasn't a world where simple things belonged. Kansas had been home once before his parents were taken in a crash on Highway 54, a slick winter morning that left a 17-year-old boy with a suitcase and an empty house. He left town a week after the funeral, enlisted, with just one thought in his head: staying would drive him crazy. People say time heals, but soldiers don't think like that. They just learn how to keep a wound quiet long enough to keep moving. At the table by the window, an elderly couple was having a late lunch. The man, black with a silver beard, read the paper. The woman, wearing large reading glasses, mouthed softly to herself as she dipped a piece of bread into her soup. Nearby, a little boy, about 4, named Leo, judging by how Margaret called to him, ran loops around the chairs, clutching a small plastic toy car. Every time he let out a loud, the old woman just shook her head and smiled with her lips closed, saying nothing. Ethan watched them. He wasn't the kind to let anyone slip past his line of sight. Not out of suspicion, just habit. A deep one that let him read the world through the tiniest details. And then he saw her. In the corner near the glass, behind a dry, brittle cactus in a pot, sat a little girl, 3, maybe 4 years old, dark skin, curly hair, wearing a pale blue dress. She sat very still, as if glued to the seat, hands resting on her eyes. Her gaze didn't land on anyone directly. It drifted across the room, brushing every face just long enough to see, but not long enough to be noticed. But she was looking for something, for someone who could read what she couldn't. Across from her sat a man, tall, wearing a gray suit, blonde hair neatly trimmed, eyes pale blue, almost clear. He was reading a thick book with no visible title. He hadn't touched the child, hadn't spoken a word. All he did was read. And that was what caught Ethan's attention. Nobody takes a 3-year-old out to eat and then buries their nose in a book. Nobody drives down an interstate and just sits there beside a child like she's carry-on luggage. Ethan turned his coffee cup slowly, his index finger tracing the rim's warmth. He didn't look at the girl again. He didn't need to. He knew in just a few more seconds she would glance his way again. And she did. Almost as if on cue, the same motion. Only this time her eyes lingered, and in them a slight tremble just for a moment. From the kitchen, Margaret came out, carrying a tray. She set the sandwich in front of him and asked gently, "Need any sugar, hun?" Ethan looked at her, a simple question, but her eyes squinted, just a little, like she too sensed something wasn't quite right in the air of the diner. Ethan shook his head and gave a faint smile. Leo ran past again, nearly bumping into the little girl's hair. She flinched. No sound. The man across from her glanced up just once, but it was enough to stop Leo in his tracks. Ethan turned to look outside. The parking lot was mostly empty. A dark gray SUV was parked near the utility pole by the road. No one inside, but the engine was running. There was a superhero sticker on the rear window, but not the kind kids put up, the kind used to block the view. He stood, walked his coffee cup over to the sink behind the counter where Margaret was setting out a tray of apple pie. She looked at him. He spoke low. "That little girl in the corner. You noticed anything?" Margaret glanced over quickly. Years of raising 3 kids flickered behind her. She's been sitting there a while. Hasn't said a word. I haven't seen her eat, but once or twice I think she was crying quietly. I couldn't tell why. Ethan nodded. He walked back to his table and sat, this time facing her more directly, and then the girl looked at him, this time directly. Her right hand lifted slowly. She curled it into a fist, then opened it once, twice, 3 times. Not dramatic, but not hidden either. A signal, the universal 1, SOS, in silent form. He knew, and he believed her. No more doubt. When his gaze locked with the little girl's, young Leo accidentally dropped his toy car, which rolled to a stop at the foot of the man in the gray suit standing next to her. Cole. The man looked up, not at Ethan, not at Leo, but at the girl. His eyes were cold. He said nothing, didn't raise his voice. Just one look, sharp and still, was enough to make the girl pull her hand back and hurriedly place it in her lap. Ethan pressed his fingernails hard into his palm until it turned white. Late afternoon in Kansas was starting to turn chilly, but inside, the air was quietly beginning to boil. The girl had given a signal, and the old soldier knew then he couldn't walk away from this place like some passing traveler anymore. Margaret's diner flicked on its yellow lights just as the last rays of sunlight slipped through the cracks in the shutters. Outside, it wasn't fully dark yet, but the dimming light was enough to draw a line between inside and out, between the cozy little diner and the silent world beyond the glass. Ethan hadn't touched his coffee a second time. He sat still, watching, breaking down every detail, like he was on a front line. Cole sat upright, eyes fixed on his phone. His face gave nothing away. He didn't speak, didn't wipe the girl's mouth, didn't bend down to say something kind or coaxing. A stranger sitting next to a lost child might have looked more involved than he did. Lily wasn't eating. Her hands rested in her lap, her eyes on Ethan. She didn't blink for a long time. didn't look at Cole. The stiffness in her body didn't come from fatigue. Came from fear. Fear of being seen. Ethan took a small sip of his coffee, holding the cup, but not lifting it all the way. Questions drifted through his mind, not one of them fully formed, but the feeling was unmistakable. That man wasn't the girl's father. He stood up and walked over to the table, still calm. On the outside, each step steady, neither rushed nor slow. "Excuse me. Hope I'm not interrupting." Cole looked up. His lips curved into a smile, but his eyes stayed cold. "What do you want?" "I was just wondering, is the girl your niece?" A brief hesitation. "She's my daughter." "Is there a problem?" No, just she reminds me of my little cousin when she was a kid. Thought she was real sweet and got curious, that's all." Cole gave a faint smile and nodded, but the gesture was too perfect, like it had been programmed to seem friendly. Lily glanced briefly at Ethan, her hand moved slightly, palm tightening into a fist, then releasing. Once, twice, 3 times. This time it was slow, deliberate, no room for doubt. Ethan feigned a pause as if something had just come to mind. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small peppermint candy, placing it on the table. "My niece used to love these. Wonder if the little one might too. How about giving her a candy?" he added. "Strawberry kids usually go for that." He extended his hand toward Lily. The girl looked up, eyes flicking to Cole, then back to the candy. After a brief hesitation, she slowly reached out, her tiny fingers trembling as they touched the edge of the candy. The swat came quick like a clap. Cole didn't say a word. He swept his hand across the table, striking Lily's wrist. Not hard enough to make a loud sound, but just enough force to make that little arm recoil as if burned. "She's allergic. Don't give her anything without asking." His voice was sharp. He stood up straight, put the candy back in his shirt pocket, and looked at Lily slowly, deliberately. She didn't cry, but her hands pulled back, curling around the hem of her shirt, gripping tight. An unconscious, defensive reflex. Her small shoulders quivered, her eyes lowered, not just in fear but from a trust that had just cracked. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Cole gave a slight nod like slamming a door shut. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. A firm, silent signal. The conversation was over. Ethan turned and walked back to his table. His back was straight, but each step seemed heavier than the last. The air in the diner, already quiet, had turned thick, as if someone had dimmed a layer of light. The faint clink of a spoon against a glass, the breeze slipping through the door crack. Everything was swallowed by a dreadful silence. Margaret looked over from behind the counter, her brow furrowed. One hand held a towel-wrapped glass, the other pressed flat against the counter as if trying to steady herself. Ethan sat down, let out a quiet breath, then spoke, loud enough for Margaret to hear. "Call the police. The sooner the better." Margaret froze for a moment, then gave a small nod. In the corner of the diner, Lily still sat upright, not leaning against the chair, as if she was afraid that if she let herself rest on anything, she might not be able to get back up. The coffee and the cup had gone cold. Ethan didn't drink any more. He stood up, again, walking with steady steps towards The back of the bar, where the light from the ceiling fixture caught the fine layer of dust on the glass surface. Margaret was standing there motionless. She held an old cloth, its frayed edges coming loose, and slowly wiped a clean glass. The motion was repetitive, but her eyes were fixed on the empty space in front of her, as if trying to convince herself that she was still in control of the bar, still in control of her life. Ethan approached unhurried. When he was just a step away from the counter, he stopped and placed both hands on the hard wood. He didn't knock, didn't make a sound. He simply rested his hands there like someone placing a hand on a door before opening it with words. He bowed his head slightly, voice low. "I've confirmed it." The girl signaled again. It wasn't a mistake. Margaret turned toward him, her eyes heavy. She looked at him for a few seconds, unblinking, not asking anything right away, as if reading something in the expression of the old soldier. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice raspy, but without hesitation. Ethan nodded, eyes steady on her face. "I'm a Marine. I've seen combat." That was a distress signal used when a victim can't speak. Short, clear, 3 times. Just like the manual says. Margaret turned her head toward Cole's table. Lily was still sitting there, unmoving, like a piece of furniture set in the wrong place. She watched for a few more seconds, then turned back, speaking very slowly. "If I call the police and I'm wrong, can I be sued?" "Possibly. But if you don't call, and I'm right, a child might be taken out of the U.S. tonight." Margaret let out a sigh. The hesitation in her eyes was gone. She nodded a small nod, but a heavy one. A nod she would never forget. "Follow me." She led Ethan behind the counter, slipping through the wooden door into the back where the cold storage and break room were. The space was narrow, damp, but soundproof enough that no one outside could hear a thing. Margaret took out her phone and dialed a number. The screen lit up with the words, "Rachel Monroe, Sheriff." Lifting the phone to her ear, she spoke quickly. "Rachel, it's me, Margaret. Cafe at Rest. Stop number 8. I've got an emergency." The woman on the other end didn't sound alarmed, just asked briefly, "Is anyone hurt?" "Not yet, but there's a little girl about 3 years old. She's with a strange man. Not eating, not talking, no touch." And Margaret glanced at Ethan. "Someone here confirms she's signaling for help." There was a pause on the other end. Then Rachel asked, "Who confirms it?" Ethan raised his hand and Margaret passed the phone to him. He put it to his ear. "My name's Ethan Walker, former Marine. I can provide my military ID number later. I'm trained to identify nonverbal SOS signals." The girl has signaled twice very clearly. The man hasn't been violent, but he's in complete control. Rachel's voice changed, focused now. No trace of doubt. "I need the location and a description."